نلتقي في هذا المساء مع الناقدة السويسرية سيبيل أوملين المقيمة في دارة الفنون من خلال برنامج الإقامات الفنية بروهلفتيا. سيبيل ستتحدث اليوم حول الفهم وسوء الفهم، ماذا بوسع الفن أن يفعل؟ قبل أن نترككم معها نود التعريف بسيبيل. هي درست تاريخ الفن والأدب الألماني والتاريخ في جامعة زيورخ، لها العديد من الكتب والمقالات في الفن المعاصر، بالإضافة لتركيزها على الأداء الفني والوسائط الجديدة والفن المفاهيمي والفن المرتبط بالسياسة. تعمل أوملين أيضا في تنسيق معارض ومهرجانات فنون أدائية في السويسرية بألمانيا. نترككم مع أوملين.
Thank you.
وأهلا وسهلا بكم.
Thank you for the introduction. I must say I didn't understand anything.
in Arabic.
Unfortunately, except Zurich and Switzerland.
Good. Two words.
I think this this little lecture I want to give to you is a lot about understanding or not understanding. I will talk about 1 hour or a little bit less, and if you have questions in the end of my talk, feel free to ask me. I want to begin with a little stories from Europe, it's a literary novel, and it's about a man who goes, he's German, he comes from the countryside, he's a craftsman, and he goes to Amsterdam in the 17th century, and sees the city and all the beautiful houses and the ships and the people there. And he is curious because he wants to know more, and he asks everybody, what's this, what is this used for, and who is belonging this, and he always gets as the answer, don't understand, don't understand, don't understand. And of course it's because he is asking in German, and in Amsterdam everybody is speaking Dutch, so there is of course in the first question a language problem. The question of understanding, and this was also an issue for me, for example, that I was for the first time in my life in a country where I really could not read or not understand anything, and after about 1 week I got to know several words like shukran, aywa, yalla, yalla, but it's not really understanding, I guess. So this situation that somebody does not understand really what's going on, what's happening, can also be very fruitful to somebody who is a stranger in the city, and so I try to sketch a little my thoughts under this view of actually not understanding very much yet. What this little story from the man in Amsterdam tries probably also to tell is that misunderstanding does not only come from the question of language and misunderstanding by not being able to translate in a proper way, but the most important problem of the story is probably that this man always asks the same question, what is this? And but always the same answer, like I don't understand. So he made a lot of wrong conclusions probably about his answers. So I can say from the story that the one important thing is also to ask the right questions, and probably also to have an analyze of the proper answers you get, and not be easy in like just accepting answers as they are, but questioning the answers again, especially when you're a stranger and traveler. So I came here actually for the first time in an Arabic country or into the Arabic world, and of course I tried to understand what this so-called Arabic art or art world can be. And of course I had my own pictures in my mind when I came here, because there is information about Arab art or art from Arabic countries also in Europe or in the Western world nowadays. if one is looking after Arab art in the Arab countries, probably as the first thing we have to deconstruct some pictures that Western artists or Western art critics have of Arab nations and cultures, and vice versa. Deconstructing some of the works of Arab artists there in the European world. What can we understand by works of artists from each other is my main question for this little lecture. And I was also able to read Edward W. Seid's book before I came here, kind of an introduction into his work. And I learned from his books about Orientalism and about cultural imperialism that, of course, we in Europe or in the Western world have a long tradition of false and romanticized images of Asia and the Middle East in our culture. And that these images, of course, served us as an implicit justification of domination and imperialism. There are false and romanticized images by the Arab, probably also the Western world, and through putting together and ripping apart words and images, I hope to enter a little bit in a world of discourse, of misunderstanding, and hoping that it may lead to some understanding. One of the first motivations to understand is probably the fact that people are traveling. We live now in a so-called global world, and traveling has become very easy. Intercultural exchange is supported by many nations now, and the fact that biennales of art grow everywhere in the world can be read as a fact to the wish to understand each other by showing artwork from each country. The fact that biennales are more or less organized by nations or by national focuses on art to send the best or the most interesting artists to biennales shows also the fact that we are not willing to leave national or geographical context behind us to understand, or that the national or geographical context is to be understood as well as an issue for artwork, or an important matter of fact how art can be produced somewhere. I remember that for example, the last 3 biennales in Venice were enriched by presenting new pavilions from Eastern countries like Ukraine or Belarus, but also from Palestine territories or Afghanistan, where everybody discovered works like from Emily Chassir or Rida Abdul, and where a lot of Europeans were impressed by these discoveries they made from these countries. A motivation to travel to a local art scene, for example, like I'm doing now to Amman, can be also the source or the wish of source of information, to get close to information, even if there are also books and magazines about contemporary Arab art, or also galleries in Europe who show work of Arab artists. And there the problems in my eyes begins. I was asking myself very often, what is Arab art or Arabic art, or what is Jordan art? Who is a Jordanian artist at all? And I was remembering that I had the same questions when I was writing a book about Swiss art some years ago. I had to do this for my own country, actually, to explain my own country, what is a Swiss artist. And you probably know that Switzerland is a country built in the 19th century as a national territory, that it is hosting many different cultural influences from Germany, from France, and from Italy. And art is very much influenced by this fact. I thought it could be probably interesting to look at art as kind of a universal language that is not influenced by national or territorial questions. And I also discovered that I was partly right and partly wrong. As a matter of fact, art in Switzerland has always been influenced by different cultures surrounding this small country, especially through the metropolis around the country, in France, Paris, for example, but also New York had an important role for the Swiss art in the subject of abstract expressionism. But also Vienna or Berlin were important for the development of the art and culture in this country too. Nowadays, Swiss art is, especially the young contemporary art, is very much influenced by the big number of migration aspects, and this country has always had a big influence from the former part of population. I want to tell you that 1/6 of the Swiss inhabitants have always been foreigners or migrants. They got integrated or partly integrated. And also nowadays, the Swiss National Council for the Arts, for example, who gives prizes or supports or grants for artists, they define Swiss artists not as somebody who has been born, for example, in Switzerland, but who lives and works in Switzerland for almost about 3 or 4 years. So the belonging to an art scene and the fact that they show their work there, or they work there, they produce art there, is more important than some other issues. And probably also, it's also interesting to know that nowadays the biggest art scene in Switzerland does not live in the country itself. It lives abroad in Berlin, and there is the biggest community of Swiss artists you can find. And I have heard that also in Jordan or many Arab countries, the fact go to other metropoles like Berlin or New York or Cairo in the Arab world is very important also for the art scene itself in Jordan. When I got a little bit deeper into my understanding of what is Jordan art or art scene in Jordan in Amman, and by meeting a lot of people in ateliers and also in the cafes, I realized very soon that Jordan art scene is very tightly connected to the political situation of this country. This scene is toughly knitted to the Palestinian art scene, but also to the one in Egypt and in Lebanon. And if one looks into galleries, art galleries, bank halls, hotel lobbies, or local restaurants in Sheblaman or Shmeshani, you realize that the art market, for example, is full of Iraq art too. So I think that this political geographical situation in Jordan is quite crucial for art production in this country. Jordan is a place full of immigration from all kinds of Arab countries, mostly by political reasons. And I also learned that it's not always very opportune to ask about certain countries in the era, because they are like an open wound in this geographical bow. So I tried really to understand also the situation here as a political situation, as a situation of identity of this country. And so I thought probably it could be interesting as a first step to understand what is Jordan art, to go to a museum, because the museum has actually the role to collect something that belongs to a nation, to a territory, to a geographical area like Jordan. And then I went, of course, to the National Jordan Gallery of Fine Arts and tried to look how they conceive something like a national impact on an art collection. I was not so surprised that I could find many works in this collection from artists that live in Jordan, of course, the biggest part of the collection, but there were also many collected works by artists from Egypt, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Tunis, Morocco, of course none of Israel, and a lot of Emirates, Saudi Arabian artists are also integrated into this collection. And for my surprise, also some one bigger number of Chinese art, for example, art from Philippines, from the Indonesian islands, and also from France, Italy, and Great Britain. So I was quite interested in this number of pictures they collected. I think they started collecting in the 80s. It's an institution that is only 20 years old, and for this reason the collection is also very contemporary, I must say. This was a big surprise for me, because when you go in Europe to national galleries, you have collections that are going back 100 or 150 years at least. And in the halls are mostly shown, in the museum halls are mostly shown works from artists who has already died, like the big cultural values of the museum, and the contemporary is in a really small part. And here, the contemporary art since the 80s is quite good represented in this museum. But of course, you cannot only know about a country's artistic scene by going to a museum. And so I also tried to look to the institutions who are working mostly with really contemporary artists and contemporary arts. And as a matter of fact, I also tried to analyze some artworks and to get into a meaning of what contemporary Jordan art could, or Arabic art could be, also by collecting together a certain amount of pictures I was interested in that I saw on my way through this city. If you just look at artwork, probably can say it's a little bit strange way to get into contact with art scene. You have to talk with people, of course, but there is, of course, always also a wish to understand art by art itself, by looking at pictures, at works, and to try to discover their structures, their thematics, their issues, their content, and also because there is a hope that artists are, of course, always also expressing their wishes, their views about life, about society, about politics, to discover something behind the artist's work. Of course, you cannot read artwork as an information like in the newspaper or like text you get, but that's probably a little interesting aspect by looking to artworks, that because a lot of artworks, they try also to hide something, not to express it immediately to the spectator. They want to be a mystery, they want to be also a proof or a witness of personal feelings, personal issues, views on the world and views on life in an intelligent, artistic way. So I tried to choose some visual artworks that I saw in the National Art Gallery of Jordan, of Amman, in the Jordan National Art Gallery. And when I was there in the beginning of January, I was very surprised that the collection has showed a huge amount of so-called abstract paintings. So here you can see one of the paintings of Shuhaid Akwan with this intense red color that is sometimes also hiding figures, architectural structure, space, emotions. in a way that we know, for example, from abstract expressionism, even the color red, this very symbolic, very intense color can also be referred to other artists, of course. I was wondering myself why this collection has such a huge amount of abstract paintings, also showing them to the public. As you can see, you have a short glance into the actual collective collection, exhibition collection. And here you have, for example, the work of Oumolen, and everybody recommended me actually here to see his work because he's one of the younger active artists that are still in abstract painting. And I was also quite surprised that very young artists like Shireen Audi choose nowadays an abstract way of painting to express their feelings, their semantics, and that this kind of painting has such a big issue in Jordan. I was afterwards looking into the biographies of these painters too, and of course I saw that a lot of them were also educated by European painters or by painters from Arabic countries who went to European academies, and that the flow of this painting came from Europe somehow, but through many, many ways and biographical impact, that for some also young artists, this kind of painting is still very fresh, very subjective, very intimate to them, and worth to be tried out or to practice. And that these biographical or this educational issue for art is sometimes more important than, for example, other questions. For example, I was thinking that probably, and there I was told that I trap into something in a stereotype, or I risk to trap into a stereotype. I was thinking first for myself, probably abstract, expressive art here is chosen because of religious issues or motives, because I have read that Islam culture does not like to express realistic pictures of the world or of course of Prophet Muhammad. Islamic and Arabic art has a huge tradition in abstract painting itself, especially in the written, painted calligraphy tradition. So I thought it could be something coming from this background, that abstract expressionist artists are so well spread and well known and appreciated here, and also do this kind of painting still in a very high quality. But I was completely wrong. I discovered because many of these artists told me that it has nothing to do with religion. It has more to do with, as I said, kind of education, where they studied or what they choose by their aesthetical interests themselves, and that a lot of abstract paintings come from semantics about nature, about life in general, and more universal semantics, and of course this fits very well to the Western European image of the abstract painting, because when it was developed in the 60s and 70s in Paris and in New York, there was really also the hope of these painters that this abstract painting can be read like a universal language of art, that there is no national impact anymore, that these kind of pictures can be understood everywhere in the world. So that this belongs more to a universal expression of passion, of words, of feelings than really to a religious, cultural heritage. I was surprised then that religion or Islam has also a certain impact on art here in Jordan. And this was also from an exhibition in the National Art Gallery of Jordan, also in the Jordan National Fine Art Gallery. It was in January, where they were the last days of an exhibition on the topic of the three most important mosques in the Islamic world. It's about Mecca, about Medina, and about Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. The exhibition was a wandering exhibition. There was only one station in Amman. And they gathered together about 20 artists, contemporary artists, who were encouraged to paint about these subjects of the mosque, about these religious thematics, I would say. I was surprised that here the impression of the exhibition was mostly realistic. Everybody tried, of course, to paint the mosque as he has seen it or imagined it itself, and the paintings were sometimes like little bit fantasy paintings. A lot of mosques I saw there looked rather like UFOs than like mosques, because there were always big halos about yellowish or also this bluish light around the mosque. And it was a complete, it was an aesthetical imagination. I was really surprised to see us coming from these artists. They were all coming from Arabic countries. So I saw that realistic painting actually is also possible, or also common, and I was rather surprised that there is such a narrow connection to a religious subject like a mosque. When I compare to my home country, to my European context where I come from, I must say that religious subjects in contemporary art are very seldom. The artists there don't choose religious subjects no more. There are almost no contemporary paintings for churches. Sometimes there are some windows that can be commissioned as artwork from painters or from artists, but actually if it's about spirituality, for example, in a European country, the artists choose more natural thematics or almost scientific thematics to express something like that. There are also some religious contexts for artists sometimes in Europe, and I was actually thinking about what we have in Europe when we have some religious art or Christianized art, and of course then it came to my mind that also recently, that it's not such a long time ago, that we had two very, very famous artists in Europe who made art for churches. It was commissioned art, and it was Gerhard Richter, probably you know this name, one of the really very famous painters in the US and Germany. He made windows for the dome in Cologne, for example, all in abstract symbolic color. It was a thematic about color itself. But there was also, as a second example, Sigmar Polke, very famous German artist, painter, who had the opportunity to make new windows for a big church in Zurich, my hometown, and he accepted this offer to do that So I also was considering that religion is probably not such a big issue for everybody in Europe, but it can be also that very, very well-renowned artists are willing to deal with religious contexts for their artwork. This as a small excursus to the thing that I wanted to say about art and religion, what I discovered here. The second thing that I was surprised that when I was here in Lehma, I saw 2 or 3 exhibitions about calligraphy. And people told me that calligraphy in art is very, very common nowadays, and that this comes also from interest of the art public here, who is, of course, influenced by the background as there is religion is present in the public space, religion is present in the government, and that these kind of pictures are very quite appreciated by the people here, and this kind of calligraphy still has an impact on contemporary art practice. I started to think that also myself was, of course, when I think about Islamic art, that I would consider something as very Arabic that is influenced by calligraphy or by the combination of text and written things. And I also saw that when European artists, for example, travel to Arabic countries, they are sometimes very intrigued by this question of which ornamental visual culture in these Arab countries are to be seen. And it must not only be calligraphy, but it's some kind of an ornamental style or a visuality also in the everyday culture, who is not very much influenced by the ornament that in European or Western countries is not so very common. So I remembered that I saw an artwork of a Swiss artist group called Chalet 5. They were traveling to Egypt last year, and they were really much intrigued by these ornaments they found in the street life of Cairo, for example. And they were not so much interested in calligraphical or ornamental architectural elements they found in the architecture, for example, but they were intrigued by the ornamentals, things they saw in gardens, in the streets, above the shops, in the shops itself as decoration, elements were brought up in the streets as ornaments, as things to decorate something, but also by the ornament they found, for example, if you have a window, very often you have like a grid, I think, a grid who was ornamented in a very, in their eyes, oriental style. So they started to collect these kind of ornaments, and then they came back to Zurich and had a speech about their work, and everybody told them, oh, you have gone ornamental and you have gone oriental in your work. So I had to think about this image that, of course, is often connected to Arabic art, to being ornamental. What I found then, that when I went more to the really younger contemporary art, who was not so much represented in the Jordan National Gallery of Fine Art, but more in art spaces like here in Dara of Lehma, but also in works and exhibition projects I saw by Makan House, or also by Talmas Gallery in Cairo, or if you look, for example, also at works from Arabic countries who travel to European exhibition like Documenta or Manifesta, then you have almost a complete different aspect of art from Arabic countries, and that is an art work or an art that I would say it's a lot of influenced by documentary work. Now I have once more used a notion that is probably not so easy to understand, can also lead to misunderstandings. Why do I call this kind of work? Here we have a work from Satari. I must confess that I still have a lot of problems with speaking out Arabic names too and understanding them right correctly. But this artist, his pictures are quite well known right now also in the US and in European exhibition spaces from Lebanon, that this kind of documentary artwork is also here a big issue in contemporary art, as I could discover. Of course, in the past few years, in the contemporary art, almost everywhere in the world has witnessed a remarkable trend towards the documentary style, if I may call it so. Especially art who is said to be critical to the image, and its suggestion itself shows a certain need to document reality as it is or it could be. Exhibition and events such as Manifesta 5, Documenta 10 and 11, and several Biennale shows are and were featuring an increasing number of documentary work, but their specific character has certainly not been studied in a great detail yet. But it's obvious that documentary art implicates and involves a lot of photographic work and a lot of documentary film, or also footage from documentary films. Film and video installations, as well as photographs and conceptual works, revolve around everyday life, trying to shed light on and capture social, cultural, and political events, historic moments, and private details in a prominent and educational way. On the other side, a second line of documentary self-reflexively examines that also the own person or own biography of an artist is socially constructed. That leads somehow also back to local art scenes, local context, to Arabic context, who can be different or differentiated again in context of several countries. The massive impact of the latest political events such as 9/11, the war in Iraq, the war in Lebanon, the war in Gaza, the increasing right-wing shift also in many European governments, and the problematic of refugees have since the 1990s fueled new debates about repoliticization of contemporary art. More than a decade after the fall of the Iron Curtain in Europe, for example, numerous artists from the transforming countries in Eastern Europe, the Levant, and also Asia are more and more focusing on their own art historical and social cultural roots instead of gearing their works toward Western art markets. Thereby, they are establishing new links to the present, which are often expressed in a documentary style. This work, for example, comes from a photo collection that this artist has gathered together by himself, taking pictures with the camera since he was a boy of 15, but also by gathering together other pictures, as also Valitrat and his other group, for example, for Lebanon does. I saw also work in catalogs in Dara al-Funun. Here you have the work from Lehma, also a Palestine, also a Lebanese artist, and he is, for example, examining city maps. So he takes real city maps, the structure of city maps. I think this is Beirut here, and he tries to convert this real structure of a drawing into a caoutchouc object that he can lay on the floor or put on the wall. So this artwork has also a documentary character. On the one hand, it comes from a reality of a city plan, of a structure built through history, through the last decades, but it has also, of course, an aesthetical form now, because it has been transformed into another material, not in paper as we know it from charts or maps, but in caoutchouc, in a material you know also from floors sometimes, but also from other architectural contexts. So this shifting work of shifting elements from the reality that could document reality, of course, it's also intrigued and involved by aesthetical meanings, and very often artists also try not only to give visual aspects of their documentary work, but they also contribute text or text element, titles, footage of oral history conversations to their installation. I think also the work of Ahlam Shili can be viewed in this context of a documentary aspect of work, even if some photographs are, of course, not only showing problematic aspects of the conflict, but also very intimate moments of everyday life in refugee camps or in villages in Palestine territories that seem at first glance to be quite normal or quite peaceful, but if you start to look the context of the picture, the group of the picture, how they are put together, how each picture develops into another picture and tries to tell a story as a whole selection around the thematic. So we get into a narration of the story, into a story about an era, a territory, a political situation that is, of course, on the one hand documentary, but on the other hand also full of aesthetical questions to be shown to the public. To come to an end with my little observations about my first impressions of the art scene in Amman, in Jordan. The situation that this country is surrounded by many conflicts, political and also military conflict, gives certainly a certain impact and also importance of the political thematics in the art of this country, even if it's not always shown into photography or film aspects of artistic work. Sometimes I feel also that many of these abstract paintings can also show a lot of the struggle, of the conflict inside that people live here if they are trying to express themselves with very strong colors, with very molded colors, heavy brush strokes, and merging these colors together in a very thick and dramatical way. But one situation that is really intrigues me is a certain asymmetry in this town or in this country, I must say, and I think this comes really from the political situation that is, of course, so near here to be seen that this asymmetry, how political problems are solved, is not easy to balance in a harmonical way, but that is an issue for many conflictuous and dramatical issues and thematics also in the artwork of this country. I was very surprised that by the conversation of one young artist here in town who does performance and theatre work, that he does not refuse at all also European or Western references for the context, to contextualize his artwork. And I was telling myself also that this could be a certain aspect of asymmetry, that everybody or most of also foreigners who come here try probably also to make asymmetric context reference for this artwork, that they also always compare with European or Western artwork that has already been done. And this young artist told me, no, for him it's not a problem actually, because it's part of his situation. And also when I read the books of Edward W. Said about Orientalism, I was very surprised that he always has referenced actually European sources of his knowledge about the Orient. He had examined very carefully all these historical reports of Chateaubriand, Lamartine, of the Egypt, French scholars who went to Egypt in the 19th century. And that this asymmetrical situation of references is probably also one part of the reality that is actually to be seen and to be worth to reflect it. This young artist, for example, he talked me about his work, how he tries to see it, and of course sources from European performance artwork were very important to him, like Artaud's Theatre on Cruelty or Samuel Beckett's notion about movement in space and time in the theatre, and at last also Peter Brook as a very important theatre maker from the US. And when I was asking him about his Arabic or Arab references, he told me that these were his own, and that he is creating them right now out of all these other references, and just by doing it right now out of the moment of his work, and that he's trying to reflect these kind of own-made references or own-made theoretical aspects about his works by documenting themselves in his artistic praxis. So I discovered that he is quite close actually to research in his artwork, and I had several conversations with young artists, also for example Laqa'a House, I think it was with you, that we have discovered that research and art here in this contemporary art praxis is very close and very tightly knitted together. And this was an aspect that was very astonishing for me, and also made me a big hope for this referential work that it's ongoing now, because it's actually the thing that every artist has to do wherever he lives, have his own research, make references to his own work, and this kind of performative aspect of his artistic practice is kind of universal or global. Yes, now I'm really coming to an end, and I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would especially also thank Dara, who has hosted me here for more than 1 month. And it's my last public talk here in this era for a certain time, but I hope that I can come back and discover more and understand more of the situation of art in Arabic countries. Thank you for all your hospitality here, and thank you for also your time you gave me and for the answering of my questions I had. I hope I understand now a little bit more.
Thank you very much. I just have a question/comment. You've used the word, or you described some artists as being young. I would like to know more, on what basis, what's the reference? Like when you talked about the work of Shireen Auder or Ammar Khammash, you described them as being young artists. Ammar Khammash is one of the most well-established artist/architect in Jordan and in the region.
Probably I made a mistake. Sorry, Ammar Khammash is born in the 60s.
He's probably in his 40s, maybe.
In the 40s.
Early 40s.
Okay.
I'd just like to know, because we always have this debate about how we describe artists as being young artists. So I wanted to know, because many times, like artists who use the mediums such as installations or video art, and they've been working for the past 10 years, and people call them still young artists. So I just wanted to see your point of view, or why do you call them? Shireen Auder has been working also for the past 10 years or more. She's in her mid-30s, or maybe, I'm not sure. And she's been exhibiting for the past 10 years. So I just wanted to see why do you call them young artists? Is it because of their age or their experience for you, or?
I think with Shireen Auder, I thought she was born in 1960 somehow, or 64. So I think she's not old.
So the reference is the age.
Yes, and when I look to her painting, somehow she tries really to fresh up also in her artistic expression, this older style of abstract expressionism. I have also seen with Ammar Khammash and Ali Jabri. I have to take my notebook out with the names I made this. Also with the ages. I saw there is also really younger artists. There was also younger artists in the collection, like Hani Alkam, who is playing now, who is making paintings in a figurative style, in mostly portrait, very expressive portraits, and he's scoping with the thematic of the whale. It was for me also a quite interesting situation that a man here in Amman tries to treat the subject of the whale, that I was connecting more to female thematics. And this is certainly a young artist in my eyes. The other expressionists, I saw that they were quite renowned, that they were established. I would say they're established. But some of them are really trying to keep fresh this abstract painting in her way, in her tradition, or also in her way to do it. And this seemed to be quite a refreshing young attitude. Probably I mixed up here the age of this woman, Shiba Kwan. I don't know how old she is exactly, but
what's the name again?
Sibylle It's a he. I really don't know. I just have to check my list. I was surprised that there were many artists born around in the 60s. Amar Kamash is born 1960s, so a little bit older.
For me, Amar is not a young artist. I wouldn't describe him as a...
Not same generation, she.
No, I mean, this is also his experience and his work. Young, for me, does not, I don't know.
So I think this is an important question because also like internationally now we see a lot of awards for young artists and it seems that there's a global definition of young and youth to be up until 35. So, but I mean anyway, translating this to Arabic
so I
is
was
always
just
very tricky.
interested to know how do you see what's young and what's older and what's, from your point of view?
Actually, for me, it was not a question of age. I have chosen this picture because they looked fresh to me. Is actual, contemporary, I would say. And it's probably not so much a question about being younger and older. I can imagine that the question of being established and not yet established intrigues artists more. And of course, there is kind of a magic age around 40 where young artists are grown up and then they have really to have been at their mid-career or whatever. And but also you can be very young when you are 60 in mind and always discovering. In Europe we have several artists, like for example John Armlader. He is 60 years old and he is always together in show with young artists. So he is also actually part of the young art scene.
Correct.
And I just was hoping, just by looking at these pictures, that this could happen probably also in Jordan. That when a museum makes an exhibition of its collection, that they try to mix up the generation by the aspect of actuality of the paintings.
Can I just add to what you were saying? Is there any methodology or way to detect maturity of a talent? So you can refer to some art as young and art as mature. Is there a way you can see through this? This might sum up the point.
This is a difficult question. I would say I'm teaching in art schools a lot. So I know how very young art looks. It's very fresh, but it's sometimes only one idea. It's very simple. And if I would say if there is a certain maturity to be discovered, it could be in a way more complex. Also when it's simple. But I think that the maturity of a work can only be judged work by work. There is no general method. But if I compare sometimes young works from very young artists, like just coming out from schools, and with work from artists who have worked 60 or 40 years, for example, then I see the difference in it. It's a question probably of intensity, mostly. And that the experienced artists try to keep up an idea and to follow it for years, but it cannot be seen in one single work. So if you make a test with me, I would refuse to that. Yeah.
I'd like to add, if you allow me.
Yeah. Or ladies first.
Two ladies, one man.
I wanted to ask, you used the word aesthetic more than once, but you used it for the paintings, and you used it when we were looking at some of the works in multimedia by the Lebanese artists. And I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on how this aesthetic there was a question, you used it, you said the question of aesthetic in the Lebanese artist's work. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how did you, I didn't quite understand what you meant.
Was it this one?
Yeah, what you meant by the,
yeah. Actually, I was trying to tell that even if this work could be considered below the notion of documentary art, also pictures like we see here from, or photos we see here from Ashili, that they obviously document something, but there is also a question about not only to be documentary. I know it's, especially in photography, it's a big issue. It has always been, because there have always been these two ways of documentation, in a journalistic way or in a way how to report from something in an objective, real way. And on the other side, there was the temptation, I say, from the aesthetical point of view, of the beautiness of making a good or a beautiful picture. And here in this example with the caoutchouc map, I just wanted to point out that the material has two aspects, like being documentary or being aesthetic. It's merged all together, of course, and it's not so easy always to mix up these two words. I don't know if you are satisfied now.
I'd like to add for my complete question about the artists and the generation etc. Since 40 years, I was following our friends, international friends, when they come here to cover our activities. They always concentrate on the triangle of intelligentsia. What I mean by triangle of intelligentsia of galleries. The first attractive places. Okay, Dart الفنون, a great place. National Gallery, fantastic place. But according to me as a historian and art critic, they are not enough to give the panorama what you need. Because first, we have underground artists, individuals.
Mm-hmm.
They have not the chance to be appreciated or the relation etc. Underground here in Wade, if you go down, you find many artists in the street with their lives, they are designing young. They have no relation with bourgeois or with gallery etc. We have hundreds of students graduated. My colleagues are actually as professor at the university with me. The fluid young at their home, they are painting, have no relation with the domination. I'm not condescending. I don't have ideology. I speak contra-dogmatico. I'm not dogmatic. So, your research could be more rich if you broaden your communication with individuals, not to be only attractive with the basics 3 or 2 minutes. Just suggestion. But at the same time, I appreciate, and maybe my colleague with me, with your efforts you have done for this.
I agree that I was not so in the underground. You're completely right. Yet, I saw some artists that will probably judge themselves being underground too, but I could not really discover what it was, if it was really underground or not. And of course, I had followed also rumors of go there and see that, and this is underground. I must say also sometimes the doors of the underground were closed. I was there and nobody was there to open me up. So it's
underground as a place, sorry, I mean.
I know what you mean, yeah.
An artist painting, they have no relation, no spotlights, no chasing by critics, because they don't have, in Zurich, for example, or Lucerne now, when you want to cover the art scene in Zurich, I don't think you go to two galleries and say this is panorama, no?
I would go to the galleries, but I would go to the museum too. When I have to go with a certain era, for example, when I go to Sweden and I want to know something to a Swedish art scene, of course I go also to a museum, how they collect this national or territorial collective memory of paintings. And of course it's good to go to the underground too. But I must say, I just started the research here and I had two acquaintances probably with underground artists, and I could not yet put them into an underground frame for myself, because I think underground is something very, very difficult to understand, and I want to talk about things that I thought I could understand, probably. But if you will be a guide for me to the underground scene, I would love it.
I can say something frankly, we have not been told yet. I am an art critic. And I'm a critic in Jordan. I'm the professor of art criticism since 40 years old, no?
Yeah.
I knew about you only by your statement. So we are ready here to help you. The Ministry of Culture, they have department. The Jordan Art Association, they have department. But to be attractive, per moda, free galleries, I think, always includes the chasing horse, the scoperto della cultura.
I have heard about the underground space that will be open next month, I guess. And unfortunately, I'm not here anymore, but I will come back and I hope it's still open, because I lived in Berlin and this was very underground. And one thing of the underground is sometimes you are too late or too early. It's not yet there or it's already over. So probably I had a little bit bad luck with the underground. But next time I will do better.
Speaking of our museums being so young, we're looking for previous eras. I don't believe we have enough collections. They moved since the Ottoman Empire to Turkey to Europe. Even in Iraq, you have very great work, not in Iraq, it's in Europe or Turkey for Arabic work. I mean, that's why I believe we don't have previous collections we have previous art, different eras.
Was this was more a comment, I guess, or did I?
That's a comment.
Yeah. You wanted to focus on the young tradition of this collection work.
Our art 100 years ago. Where is it? I believe we don't have it. It's in Turkey, it's in Europe, European museums, even for Iraq, Sweden and so on. That's why our museums are so long.
Yes, I think this is wonderful because it's very contemporary. It really shows the moment, and I thought for me it was very positive, a positive discovery that the National Gallery of Jordan has work from young. That's why I probably talked about young artists, because no work is older than 30 years, and this is very young actually. I think this is something very, very important and very exciting. For my discovery, it was.
How can you come over this difficulty to bring artists from Arab world and Europe, for example? What means would you suggest for the two artists to come to more understanding or more appreciation of each other's work?
Yeah. I talked a little bit about asymmetry, and something I discovered here what was quite interesting for me was that Amman is very international in the art scene. Not only by the political situation that it's surrounded by so many Arabic countries, that it has migration phenomena, that you have here Lebanese, Syrian, the people, Iraqi, people from Iraq, Iran, etc., from the Emirates, but also that there are so many programs, like the French Cultural Center, the Italians, the Swiss, the Germans, the Spanish institutes that try to get an international art scene here to gather together. Also Dara does it, or also Makan House does it. They try to get together people from different cultures and different countries. And I think this is something that is really important for Arabic countries, that they try to intermix, to interfere with other cultures and tell about their heritage, about their cultural value, about their vision of the world, of the visuality. And this really, I think this is, there I found Amman as a place, as a metropole in Europe or the United States, very open, very full of this hospitality towards foreigner in art, and also very open to communicate. And I think this is something very important for art in general. And this could also probably, in one place, probably also equalize a little bit this asymmetry. That you have your own practice in perform your own context and your own references. You think this could be a way?
Possibly finance is very important.
Yeah. Traveling needs money, and time. Yeah.
Possibly the education part, and then from school to university, get it as one thing to appreciate and put it into the education, I think.
When I was really talking to people, I was surprised how, of course I'm in the art scene somehow, but I also read it in the newspaper that it's a lot of hope in the art. There are workshops for children with artists. I read that in prisons they make workshop with artists. I think there is really hope that art can bring people together and to communicate. Many artistic projects also work in a participative way, like the state of Ismail of Ibrahim downstairs in Dara. It's the beginning probably of participative art.
All universities are offering now some courses in art and music, and there are many young people coming out, and they need employment. They need somehow to benefit from their education. Tomorrow there's going to be another lecture about music by a professor at Jordan University talking about the role of music in culture. Another new blend things together, put some strategy or something. Can be bringing some fruitful result out of the work. Because artists they're gonna work each on themselves, try to succeed, try to give a message. But for people who are having an oversight of the matter, it's very important. So you are one of pioneers in this matter, trying to show the conflict and understanding and misunderstanding something new. So attracted me to come here, even though I am not an artist. I'm an economist, basically. So this is why I finance and education. Sorry, not to intrude.
I'm not an artist.
I wanted to ask, how much do you think that kind of Eurocentric educational practices in art have affected the youth? Kind of, you talked about young artists being very referential of Western artists and Western theology. How much do you think the education in that sense played a role, and how important do you think for younger artists, do they need to kind of be more referential of either realities surrounding them or maybe even Arab historic arts to create a kind of more symmetrical, modern kind of art or kind of identity through modern art?
I have to hope that this is its beginning, or they are already in the middle of it. Probably I know too less because I cannot read Arab language, but I saw also articles from scholars from here that are architecture or contemporary art. Very, very interesting. And I think this knowledge must be spread out, of course. Because when I read texts in catalogs about Arabic artists, very often they invite European critiques to write, and of course they make references to Bonnard, to European painting, or to abstract expressionism in America. But when there are people here to write about your own culture here, this is a very big issue for this era, and of course it has to do with education. I think to be critical or to be also to reflect art praxis needs a certain point of view that is not always melted into the art. Not always really looking the underground, because the underground has to be on its own for being underground. If anybody steps into underground, for example, it's not underground anymore. So this kind of era and space to discover its own reference, as this young artist told me, that he's really now thinking about his own work in a different way, and he starts to put on up his own values for his work and write them down, document them. I think this is a very important issue. And there, I have hope, because I see that there are very clever, intelligent artists from all generations. It's not a question of being young or older. I think that when I go to the cafes or to the meetings, there is a huge reflective praxis also on the own work. And there, I agree with you that there is an impact on education, art schools, art historians, or cultural studies, political studies also. And what I discovered is it's always wonderful to see how these workshops, or this culture of going to workshops and to going to meetings, to networking evenings, to talks like here, that this is really something working very well. I think. So when I go to the cafes, there is always somebody to talk, always somebody here who is interesting or has an experience to tell, has a work, who is developing an idea. And it's a very open situation to share. It's not having, it's not the fear to communicate about, and probably somebody can pick me up my idea, like I often discovered that situation in Europe, that they try really to hide as long as possible and then go out and show and be the best. And here it's a very communicative atmosphere actually about art. Are you noticed?
I know.
So, I think we talked a lot. I thank you very much also for your questions, and I wish you a very, very pleasant evening. And all the best.